thanks for sharing, Jill. That was really encouraging and just helpful to hear what other people are doing, what's working. I feel like that's way easier than sometimes I get overwhelmed by all the options that there are. Okay, so this semester, we've been talking about parenting, the importance of discipline, the purpose of discipline, how to be consistent with discipline, how you can't always discipline each child the same. And you've discussed the process of teaching and training before correcting. So today, we're going to talk about when all of that just doesn't seem to be working. And there's some really great questions in your Bloom book this week that can hopefully help you reflect on your own parenting and maybe see areas that you could communicate more clearly or discipline more consistently or follow through more fully. But when you think of these moments of why isn't this working, you can almost feel the frustration and disappointment, right? Because most of us have been there, maybe this morning, last night. And often there's frustration and disappointment that is directed toward our kids. But sometimes I think that this disappointment and frustration is actually more of what we feel toward ourselves. There's definitely times that I am not the mom that I thought I would be or the mom that I wanted to be. But I do want to suggest that why isn't this working is the wrong question. Aside from the fact that parenting is sort of like a giant experiment that takes approximately 20 years to even know if it's working or not, we often feel this discouragement and frustration because things aren't going the way that we wanted them to, or parenting is harder than we thought it would be. And so rather than asking, why isn't this working, I think we need to ask, why am I frustrated right now? And how did we get here? So the first question, why am I frustrated right now, requires us not to look at the circumstances around us, but to look at ourselves. So we're going to talk about expectations. I don't like to say that we need to lower our expectations for our kids, because quite frankly, that's condescending. Like, they could not possibly rise to meet the expectations that we could meet, but we'll flex. Like, that's rude. But we're going to talk about 4 different types of expectations: reasonable expectations, age-appropriate expectations, child-appropriate expectations, and then clear expectations. So let's start with reasonable expectations. Are you ready for this? Our children are not going to do everything we ask the first time we say it with a cheerful attitude. Now, I know that sounds like a ridiculous expectation when I say it out loud, but how often are we disappointed when it doesn't happen? We are not raising robots to program and control. We're raising humans. And humans, even little ones, come with things like opinions and feelings and hunger pains and God-given personalities that are not like our own. And these things make all relationships, including parenting, challenging and really unpredictable. So it's unrealistic for us to think that when we say, share with your siblings, that our child will say, that is such a great idea, Mom. Things are a lot better when I share. And then we live happily ever after and never have to worry about sharing again. Childhood involves so much learning, and so does parenting. And we need to allow space for that learning in our expectations. Now, the second one is age-appropriate expectations. A 2-year-old is probably not going to be able to articulate, well, Mom, I didn't sleep great during my nap, so I was already feeling kind of irritable, and then I started to feel hungry, so sorry I kind of lost it on you when I wanted a snack, and you said no when you were putting dinner on the table. They're not going to be able to articulate that to you, most likely. But I did have one child when she was 7 that told me through tears, Mom, it hurts my feelings when you throw away my schoolwork because my teacher tells me to try my best, and when I bring it home, you put it in the trash. So we need to meet them where they're at and deal with the disappointments that sometimes we create. And children are naturally going to be childlike. So we need to relate to them in ways that they understand and help them grow emotionally as they grow physically. Okay, child-appropriate expectations. If you have a child that isn't neurotypical, expecting them to remember to do something the first time you ask without a reminder might be unrealistic. And repeating yourself 2 or 3 times might need to be the best case scenario. There also might be some medical considerations for your child that need to alter your expectations. In trying to get one of our children to stop sucking her thumb at age 2, I really don't have time to tell you all the ridiculous things that we tried to try to get her to stop, and how frustrating that it was to 100% fail, and how we chalked it up to strong will / defiance. And it wasn't until 6 years later that we found out her nose had such a significant deviated septum that they think she was using her thumb to open up her airway at night, like, for breathing. I'm not totally saying it wasn't also defiance and strong will, but there was other physical things going on that contributed to the behavior, and our expectations need to reflect the unique needs of our children. And the last expectation I want to talk about is clear expectations. Have you guys ever felt like you disappointed someone or didn't measure up, but you're not quite sure what you did to miss the mark? It feels terrible. But sometimes we expect our kids to read our minds. When my kids were little, if they were wanting a drink, they would often come in and say, "I'm thirsty," which always sounded like whining to me because I have a real low threshold for whining. And usually I would respond with something like, "That sounds like a problem. Can you think of a solution?" Which wasn't always helpful, but making the expectation clear that whining is not how we get what we need allows them to at least have a chance to meet it. Now, side note, if we set the clear expectation that whining is not an acceptable way to communicate, then we have to be the ones to sit in the discomfort of the whining long enough to not give in to the whining. Otherwise, we prove to our children that whining does indeed sometimes work. So going back to our original question of why am I frustrated right now? Aside from expectations, another thing that can play into our feelings of frustration in parenting is fear. And this is often connected to our sense of control or realization of how little control we have. And if our child is repeatedly unkind to a sibling or to a friend and is not remorseful, we might begin to wonder if this is emotional immaturity that they're going to grow out of, or is this actually the trajectory of a psychopath? And honestly, we don't know. But we need to love and parent the child that is in front of us not only the child that we fear will be. God is the one who has already written the story of their lives, and he is trustworthy, even if there's parts of the story that we wouldn't have chosen for our kids. In these moments of frustration and disappointment, reflecting on our expectations and fear can shine a light on the posture of our own hearts. And then the second question that we can ask when we feel like things aren't working is, how did we get here? And that requires us to look at our child. So since we're trying to focus on the heart and not just behavior, we need to look at what might have led to this behavior. And there's multiple factors to consider that might affect our child's decisions. Feeling tired, feeling lonely, feeling overstimulated, feeling rushed, feeling disconnected, feeling itchy, feeling scared, feeling too hot, feeling too cold, feeling hungry, feeling nervous, feeling independent. The possibilities are basically endless. And the goal is not necessarily to eliminate these factors, because that would not prepare them for life. But the goal is to acknowledge them and understand that as silly as all of these sound, we as adults are affected by almost every single one of them too. And if I'm struggling to be kind when I'm overstimulated and hot, my kids probably are too. And it's understandable. We might actually have more in common than we think. So we can come alongside our child and say something like, I'm feeling hot right now too, which makes me a little bit grumpy. So can we practice using kind words together? And it builds empathy, not only for us, but also for our kids. Another thing to consider when asking, how did we get here, is thinking about how your child views boundaries. Now, learning boundaries is a really important part of childhood, and rules help us teach our children where those boundaries are. Now, some kids see a boundary, and they're not at all interested in coming remotely near it. They might be motivated by a strong internal sense of right and wrong, or they might be externally motivated by pleasing others or by the threat of consequences. Either way, they're trying not to cross the boundary. And other kids are like the raptors in the 1993 Jurassic Park movie. There's a scene where this guy is describing the raptors to a group of people, and this is what he says. They're extremely intelligent, problem-solving intelligent. That one, when she looks at you, you can see she's working things out. She had them all attacking the fences. And a woman says, the fences electrify them, right? And he responds, that's right. But they never attack the same place twice. They're testing the fences for weaknesses systematically. They remember. Anybody have a kid like this? I do. Also, this was me as a child. I didn't cross boundaries for the thrill. I was so curious and frequently touching the fence, just seeing if the boundary was still there, still necessary, testing out what I have some control over, what I don't have control over. My mom says she would tell me not to do something, and I would ask, well, what will happen to me if I do? This answer felt very important to my decision-making at the time. I wasn't even sure I wanted to cross the boundary, but I like choices, and I don't like feeling controlled. I still like choices. We'll be worshiping in church, and they'll say, stand with us. And I'm thinking, if I stand, it is because I want to stand, and not because you just asked me to stand. It is like deep within my bones. And I bet some of you have children like this. The repetitive questioning and pushing against boundaries can feel exhausting, especially for some of you rule followers who wouldn't even think to question the boundary, let alone cross it. But I really don't think that it's always defiance, nor is it always a personal attack on your parenting. So in response to kids that push these boundaries, or all boundaries, I think it's our tendency to make more rules, double down, be firmer, straighten them out. That's what my parents used to say. And I would suggest that that does not usually produce the intended outcome. Instead, I think we need to consistently enforce the boundaries in your home while also moving toward your children in love. Loving our children can feel difficult when we're feeling frustrated at behavior, and we can actually be tempted to hold back connection until they fix the behavior. But that can actually push our child farther away. Exodus chapters 5 through 14 tell the story of how the Israelites had been in harsh slavery in Egypt for 430 years. And there were 10 plagues that briefly convinced Pharaoh to let the Israelites leave. But then Pharaoh quickly changed his mind and chased after them until God uses Moses to rescue the 600,000 Israelites, not counting women, children, or livestock. And they miraculously crossed the Red Sea on dry ground. And we all know how hard it is to get our children moving in one direction. That was a miracle. Now in Numbers 13 and 14, the story picks up when Moses then sent 12 men into the land that God had promised them to spy for 40 days. And of the 12 men, 10 reported that the people living there were too strong and too mighty. Only 2 of the spies, Caleb and Joshua, said that they should not fear the people of the land, but trust the God who had already shown them great power. And in response, the Israelites tried to stone Caleb and Joshua and Moses and his brother Aaron. So as a consequence for their unbelief, the Israelites would wander in the wilderness for 40 years, one for each day that they had spied out the land. And during that time, everyone older than 20 years old died, except for Joshua and Caleb, the 2 spies that believed that God was big enough. That's a hefty consequence, and it was strictly enforced. Even Moses, their leader, died before the Israelites entered the promised land. But don't miss this. The presence of the Lord did not leave them those 40 years. His presence stayed close as a cloud by day and as a fire by night. Amidst the hunger and the weariness and the death, his presence and his care for them remained. I want to read Deuteronomy chapter 8. This is verses 4 and 5. Your clothing did not wear out on you, and your foot did not swell these 40 years. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, the Lord your God disciplines you. God's grace was not an absence of consequence. He didn't keep heaping consequences on, though, either. He wasn't like, well, and your feet are going to swell, and your clothes are going to wear out, and you're going to be hungry because it looks like you didn't bring food. They also didn't learn their lesson. Like through this discipline, it didn't actually turn their hearts back toward him. But his grace was his presence and care that continued even when it was unmerited. That's what makes it grace, getting something that you don't deserve. Paul David Tripp says in his book, Parenting, this is what every parent of every child needs to understand. The law, or rules, does a very good job of exposing your child's sin, but it has no power whatsoever to deliver your child from it. The law has no ability to rescue your child from the power of sin's grip. The law has no ability to give your child a new heart. The law has no ability to create the lasting change in your child that every parent longs for. The law cannot and will not rescue, redeem, and restore your child, but that's exactly what every child needs. God's grace does that. God's grace rescues and redeems and restores. And we can point our children to that grace by extending the love to them in the midst of their sin, just like he's extended grace to us in the midst of our sin. Romans 5:8 says, but God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Your child that is kicking against boundaries needs connection and needs both discipline and unmerited love and grace that is not based on their challenging behavior. And at the same time, your compliant child that is seeking to please and perform and earn love and is scared of failure is also in desperate need of connection and needs to be shown unmerited love and grace that is not based on their good behavior. That's the gospel. We all, us and our kids, are in desperate need of Jesus, and we always will be. So when discipline feels like it's not working, we have an opportunity to step back and look at our expectations, look at our fears, look at the external contributing factors, and look at how God's created our child. It is vulnerable and scary to love someone that we have so little control over. But discipline alongside grace and love has been so beautifully and gently shown to us by our Heavenly Father so that we can extend that to our children. I want to close today by reading a liturgy over you. I just love liturgies because I feel like they give words to, I think, what my heart truly wants to say and can't find the words for. This specific one is a liturgy for changing diapers, and it's the second one. This guy writes two of them because he says, for there are many diapers that must be changed. So I want to just read this over you. Ah, Lord, what a mess we sometimes make of our lives. What a tragic comedy is even our most sincere attempt to merit righteousness on our own. We are no more able to render ourselves holy than is this infant to keep itself unsoiled. I am as dependent upon your grace and your own righteousness, O Christ, to justify and make me clean, as this little one is dependent upon me to wash the residue of filth from its skin, wrapping it again in soft and freshly laundered garments. Let me not be frustrated by the constant repetition of this necessary act on behalf of a child. Rather, let the daily doing of this be a reminder to me of the constant cleansing and covering of my own sin, that I, helpless as this babe and more often in need, enjoy in the active mercies of Christ. Amen. You're dismissed to your small groups.